Okay, I'm going to do another retake of a high-level interview or um, explainer of what my goals are. I'm up at Massanutten in near Shenandoah, Virginia, and Harrisonburg, kind of between the two of them. Um, just up here, my usual September um, get out in the country trip. And I have been talking about the development of the Plant B cooperative. This is basically it's a peace movement tool for establishing global peace and getting rid of nuclear weapons, and essentially bribing everyone on the planet by giving them free energy in exchange for agreeing to be peacefully coexisting with everybody else. We all get an equal piece of the pie, and it's up to you to do something useful with it if you want to. Or you can just say, well, we're building a system that's going to allow me to sitting in my room watching video games and playing video games and being on the internet and interacting with other people through the internet. And food will be delivered to me, and any kind of medical problems I have, I go to the medical facility on the platform. And so you have a life where you can be totally autoctic. I can't pronounce this word yet, but it basically means you're in a system in which you're all self-sufficient. And this is kind of the ideal goal. Um, and actually, the Seastead founder, Teal, one of the founders of the Seastead Institute, Thiel was talking about and if you read the Seastead Institute's website, it's kind of a libertarian-like organization. What they'd like to envision is having these floating city-states where the people make up the rules for it. And my city-states are going to have a cooperative business as the founding principles and a rule base that is modeled after how cruise ships operate, who have people from very diverse backgrounds peacefully coexist. You set rules in place that if you violate it, you go away. That's real simple. It's a good training mechanism. People learn pretty quickly when they see people just have to leave the ship because they're not behaving according to the rules. So that's just an example. I'm not saying that that's what we're going to do. It's, I think, going to be more like living on a college campus, and you have a bunch of people working on different ideas and having very different views of things, but they all work together and they communicate with each other and exchange ideas and have arguments and discussions and seminars and whatnot. And basically, what I am envisioning how this gets off the ground is we build the first platform out in the ocean as a university research center, where visiting professors come out and work with the makers community that we're creating on this platform. And that's basically what it's going to be. It's going to be a learning society with all the equipment that you need to do whatever experiments you're wanting to do, or build whatever equipment you need to build in order to produce new products that we need to operate the research facility. So it's basically like George Washington Carver, was it Tuskegee? Basically, they built the university. The students that came there were, the children of slaves who had been freed, and they built the university. I always, and I got all the names wrong, I'm sure. It was probably that other George Washington guy. Um, but yeah, the research on peanuts was just fascinating. I read that when I was in second grade, and I was so inspired by that idea. I really found science very interesting as a result of that one particular book. Um, so anyway, we want to build this floating platform that is, it's the goal of the research on that floating platform is to build the machinery necessary to build another platform. And these platforms basically are self-replicating, so we can have geometric growth of a new living environment for humans. And the goal is ultimately, let's just throw out the initial guesstimate is we need about 10,000 cubic meters per person to provide space for growing the food they need, providing living accommodations for them, providing food production capabilities, and food processing, that is cooking and creating healthy food for the entire population on the habitat. The energy for the habitat comes from a nuclear power plant that basically operates under the oceans. The ocean's a very good radiation shield. Not that you need a radiation shield for this technology, because the containing submersible a submersible vessel on which the reactor will operate and the ammonia generating plant will operate will be several hundred, probably 100 meters below the surface of the ocean, shielding it both from airplane attacks. Not that people are going to be doing that anymore, because our plan is to build a peaceful coexistence community based on cooperation between these city-states, and they all get to eventually define new rules for how they want to operate in their environment based on whatever they come up with. But we will have some fundamental principles that in order to use this habitat technology, you must abide by the Peaceful Coexistence Code that governs the Planet B Cooperative, who is providing the energy for operating your city-states. And that's the only thing that the cooperative is asking, is that you abide by certain fundamental principles that enable your habitat to operate as a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal compliant socioeconomic system. So you should be able to check off a box for each one of those 17 goals and others that we will come up with in the future. And so this will be basically our mission statement for the Planet B Cooperative. The ultimate goal, though, is to build a look at SpaceX and what they came from nowhere, and all of a sudden we have them shooting off rockets that cost $10 million a launch instead of $50 and $60 million a launch. And they did it by just applying basically good engineering and physics analysis to the problem. So we're going to build a spaceport that floats on one of these city-states, or surrounded by these little city-state habitat communities. And the spaceport will launch segments of a space station as the hull of the rocket. It basically can be used as the body of one of these giant toruses that was envisioned by O'Neill, I think it was, Gerard O'Neill. Colonies in Space has a good description of all that, and same with Towards Distant Sun. So a lot of this was inspired by that. And another thing that just totally blows away the idea that the free market is perfect and never makes a mistake and always optimizes everything. It's just hogwash, and it's been proven because it didn't produce those power satellites that were described in the NASA studies that were conducted back in the 1970s. We could have had a complete replacement for fossil fuels by the year 2000 based on the plan that they had put together in these initial studies. And that involved mining the moon and sending the materials from the moon into space to build gigantic solar panels that would then generate energy. The energy they generated would be microwaved down to Earth to giant collectors that would then inject that electricity directly into the grid. We're going to do, I think that was thunder. That seems wrong. Maybe it was a construction over there or something. Anyway, the general idea will still be, we just aren't going to beam the energy back down to Earth. Instead, we're going to move a lot of people onto these space habitats they talked about building. And we'll initially get the first one up and running by launching segments of rockets, or launching rockets that the fuel storage area of the rocket that is empty by the time it gets into orbit basically becomes the habitat. It's kind of like the first, what was the name of that? The Space Lab. NASA just took a section of the Saturn rocket and turned it into a living habitat, and they launched it into space. Instead of having that second section move the lunar lander and the Apollo capsule to the moon, they just took the fuel section that would have been used in the propulsion section that would have been used to move them to the moon and back, and turned it into a habitat. So what we're doing is we're going to take, you see how big the SpaceX rocket is. The bigger the rocket you need, make the more volume you get inside, and it just scales up. So we can make it as big of a diameter rocket as we need, and it just, the fuel cost for those space launches is measured in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, the fuel is an insignificant amount, and especially they're using methane, liquefied natural gas, and oxygen. I would be using something that has slightly higher specific impulse, anhydrous ammonia. It was used on the X-15 rocket plane back in the 60s. Achieved huge, it set the speed record. I mean, it was amazing aircraft feat, and the technology that they used to pull it off is very simple, actually. A lot of pumps and a lot of plumbing, but it was pretty straightforward. Anyway, and since we're producing this anhydrous ammonia for the shipping industry, which I haven't even talked about at all, our first target is farmers getting anhydrous ammonia for their crops it's totally green. Second is the shipping industry, building basically container ships out of geopolymer materials, which I talked about earlier, and the container ships would be powered using anhydrous ammonia that runs through a fuel cell to generate the electricity. Ideally, we'd get away from prop-driven and use basically electromagnetic induction of seawater to project the ship through the water. But that's one of those neat research projects that we're going to be able to fund with our energy supply. Because basically what we're going to do is the cooperative is going to produce these initially platforms floating in the ocean to produce huge amounts of energy in the form of anhydrous ammonia, and that's used to replace fossil fuels. So that scales up very quickly, and we're producing all this energy. We'll do it in conjunction with island nations that are threatened by climate change the most, and teaming with them to place these platforms near their within their territorial waters, so we can use small country rules to govern how these things work to begin with, but they basically become the cooperative associated with those island states. We're going to have a pretty big storm from the looks of things. Oh, damn. This is all these pieces connect in my head, and it's hard to get them out in a way that's coherent. I need a collaborators. So I think I better call it quits and start up again later today.